Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We have with us today Carl Teichrieb. Carl, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our audience, and we have lots to talk to you about.
Mike, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
My background, a little bit about myself. I've been engaged in trying to understand and researching global transformation since the early 1990s, and full-time since 1997. I began in 1992, 1993, when I tried to understand Freemasonry. And I was asked to join the lodge. I never did join, but things were said, things were mentioned to me in such a way that it compelled me to try to understand what this was all about. And from that point, it opened up a whole different world of research in terms of, all right, where does this intersect with philosophy and politics? Where does it intersect with society? And it just snowballed. And it snowballed significantly to the point where it became a hobby out of control. And so in 1997, an American author by the name of Gary Kaw, who needed help writing another book, asked if I'd be willing to come on as his director of research. I did that from 97 to 2001. And then from that point on, I've been doing it independently as a freelancer for other authors, and along the way, going to as many events, boots on the ground, as I possibly can, as I work to try to endeavor to understand global transformation, politically, religiously, economically to some degree, and certainly as it impacts culture and society. And then how does all of this challenge the Christian worldview? How does this impact us in terms of our understanding of where we sit in our culture? And that's really been a huge part of the work that I've been doing.
Okay, so global transformation, obviously that covers a lot of ground.
Sure does, absolutely.
Now, we have your book here.
Yes.
Pardon. Game of Gods, and can you just give us, a little bit of a summary tying this to what you just said? In other words, what are you trying to accomplish here before we drill down into a few things?
Sure, no, that's great. It can be summed up in one sentence.
Okay.
That the aspect of our human desire, our fundamental human desires, can be broken down into three primary desires. One, to be as God. The second is to be masters of meaning and destiny. And the third is to build heaven on earth. And that, in many respects, is what this is all about. And so we break that down. I take a look at it from the perspective of history, the history of thought, the history of intellectual change, the move from Christendom into modernity, from modernity into postmodernity, and then what comes after postmodernity. And I make the argument that we're already in a post-postmodernity mind frame, and I call that re-enchantment. I'm not the only one. Others have used the same terminology, arguing that postmodernism, by its nature, when you boil it right down, leaves us all with questions, but doesn't give us direction. All we have are questions and no answers. And it's a pursuit of questions, and it's a pursuit of trying to find meaning and purpose, but without finding a grounding within anything. And so while postmodernity, we still have the attitude today, we can't escape that, while we still have the attitudes of modernity with us today, the argument being made is that we are looking for something else. We're looking beyond. And what is that? What becomes the thing that we grasp? What do we hold on to? What do we long for as a culture? We're not going to turn back to Christianity. We're not returning back to modernity and the concept of the material universe being all there is.
Yeah, and the impulses are still there, though.
Those impulses are absolutely still there. What we are looking for is some sense of meaning and purpose with wonder, amazement, the idea of grandeur.
Yeah, mystery.
Mystery, exactly. So the argument I'm making is that's the direction we're turning. Now where do we look? The argument I'm making here is that we will typically look to the idea of cosmic evolution, the concepts of what we would call paganism. Paganism in a small p sense of the word, being the concept that man, God, and nature share the same. They are the same. There's a commonality. And what the book does is it breaks that down and examines it from the perspective of intellectual thought. It examines it from the perspective of theology. And then it breaks it down also into what we would call practical matters of politics. It explores it in terms of even the works of our hands, transhumanism. It unpacks it as paganism, the pagan renaissance that we're experiencing today. Cultural transformation, cultural events like Burning Man. And how does this sense of re-enchantment, this sense of mystery and wonder really play out in our culture and in our society? And more important than that, the message of salvation that comes through it. Because in every one of those aspects, there is a salvific
what's the point?
redemption
What's the destiny?
message. All of them are speaking to one of those three things: the ascension of man, becoming as God, finding meaning and destiny, or creating heaven on earth, or all three.
Yeah, so it's the old, autonomy, again, this self-transcendence, the utopian, wish.
Right.
That whole, that impulse.
But that's the game we've always been playing.
Right. It's what's old is new, what's new is old, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Now, I want to drill down on one of these today. I know we have a lot to talk to you about, and we're going to have you back as well. But the re-enchantment theme. Now, my only exposure to that term in academia is Partridge's two volumes,
Partridge, yes.
Re-enchantment of the West.
Yes.
So I have a little bit of a feel for that, but I want you to sort of give us a little bit of a definition, because for our viewers out there, it might be a new term, and it's this notion. I mean, we are sort of conditioned to think that the West is dispensing with religion, becoming more secular.
Right.
But what's really happening is the exact opposite. So go ahead.
We are definitely becoming more religious, more spiritual, not necessarily religious. Of course, the common talk now is I'm spiritual but not religious.
Right.
And so there is a hunger for spirituality, a hunger for deeper meaning. And with it, there is a lot of religious flavoring that comes through. You can't divorce the two. I just returned, and I know the timing of this is somewhat important, but I returned a month ago from the Parliament of World Religions, where we had 7,500 religious leaders representing over 200 faiths, including secularist and humanist thinkers, recognizing that we're all searching for some form of spirituality, some sense of spiritual connection.
Something that transcends.
Right. And re-enchantment bumps into this in a significant way, because re-enchantment is this longing for mystery, a longing for meaning, a longing for some transcendent reality, something beyond just the material, but not Christian. Not Christian.
Yeah, this sneaks up on people because I think the militant atheist crowd gets a little too much press.
They do.
And then the whole, there's the obligatory, especially around Easter, of how many churches are closing.
Right.
So we're conditioned to think that it's trending one way, but it's actually not.
No.
So all of the things that you're talking about just really kind of sneak up on people, because we're used to, again, seeing the militant atheist, and again, they get too much press. You got Bill Maher, on TV, and everybody gets sort of their jollies out of him making fun of whatever it is, particularly, Christianity. You've got the scientific community, with Richard Dawkins, and you see enough of that, and you tend to think, well, this is where everything is trending. But it's actually not the case, because most people don't want that.
Right.
They want something transcendent. And that's where you get into this. Now, you've used the word transcendent and mystery. You've used, I don't know if you've used myth itself, but I mean, that's a big part of this.
Yes.
Again, if you want something that transcends the material world, but you don't want, the traditional Judeo-Christian thing, or even the traditional anything, you've got to sort of fill that vacuum with something. And, what we do, here on this show, we like science fiction. Science fiction is a transmitter of these ideas, very, very obviously. And sure, you can watch, practically anything and see, Christian themes in it, because, to steal the line from Lewis, it's the myth that's true and all that stuff. But there's an intentionality behind it that works against, Judeo-Christian themes. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, because you have your head in that a lot. So
Right.
talk about the role of myth and archetypes. I mean, how does the culture sort of articulate this stuff and then transmit it?
One of the perspectives I take in the book, and this is important to draw this out because there's a number of different ways we can interpret myth.
Sure.
It's not static. The approach that I'm taking is that myth is a narrative. I'm not talking about fairy tales. I'm not talking about
Right.
fable. We're talking about the construction of narrative.
Right, storytelling.
That's right, a framework, really the transmission of a worldview. And behind that, and John Oswalt brings this out very well, is the concept of continuity. That myth, the way that I'm looking at this, is preaching or communicating a sense of continuity, that man, nature, the gods, the cosmos, everything has this interconnection, that there's an interdependence, and that the story of myth, ancient myth, all the way up to today's new myths that we're weaving, speak to this sense or this context of continuity, that all is found in all. Again, the concept of oneness, this idea of a core feature between humanity, between nature, and between deity. And that itself is at a mystical level. That is where the argument is being made by the pagan worldview, by the worldview of oneness that we're seeing today, by this new enamored desire for spirituality. We're seeking something that is mysterious, but still connecting us to the past, connecting us to something historical, connecting us to a new story that is really grounded in a very old framework. I like to bring it out as an ancient future worldview, because we're looking to the far past, to the pagan past, to find a new framing story for today and also for the future. And really, we're looking for this sense of mystery, this sense of connection. And my argumentation that I'm making is that where are we going to turn? Where do we end up looking?
Yeah, what's left?
Yeah, what is left? All we can do is look to the pagan past. And so today's culture is, where do we find our loyalties? Where do we find our sense of that of purpose, that sense of a deep-seated point of contact? Well, it's to the earth, it's to nature, it's to Gaia, it's to Mother Earth, it's to the globe, it's to the planet, it's to the cosmos, it's to the feelings I have inside as I connect to everything else.
Right.
And we're all chasing after that.
Right. So it's actually in a little way the language of experience, because
Yes.
okay, I know I'm here, I know you're here, I know the Earth's here, and again we have this technocratic, scientific worldview that explores those things, again, from various different fields. And so if you're going to, restrict yourself to what you think is not only what you think you know, but what is knowable,
Right.
okay, then that can sound, if you stop there, that sounds like, again, a materialistic, atheistic worldview. But when you ask like the transcendent question, okay, how do all these things connect?
Yes.
See, then it actually becomes a little bit sinister, because then you use science to explore that question, and that isn't something that is nuts and bolts.
Right.
Okay, so science actually becomes a kind of self-validating tool or mechanism. It pretends to be only about the nuts and bolts, but it's actually trying to endorse and articulate this connectivity in the minds of many scientists, many in the technology field. I mean, they're obviously, they have a scientific mindset, and a technological mindset. This is what they do. This is their skill set. But since they're asking that question about the connectivity and what it means and where it's going to take us in the future, and it actually becomes this sort of theology. It both articulates and propels it a little bit. So I kind of find that surreptitious and sinister, because you think you're looking at one thing.
No.
But what's actually sort of working in the background is this religious, spiritual, transcendent mystery thing going on.
Right.
That gets a scientific thumbs up.
Right.
And it's easy for a culture that doesn't want your primitive traditional religions in the way, that this is a belief system now that they can accept because it's endorsed by the scientific community.
I like the language of sacred secularism
Yeah.
or mystical materialism, because that's what it ends up becoming.
That's what it ends up being.
It has a religious flavoring to it. And I appreciate how you brought up the aspect of technical, the technical side. When I go to Burning Man, I've been to Burning Man a couple of times. The thing that strikes me is this is the unofficial United Nations of Silicon Valley. You have all of the tech sector.
Yeah.
You've got executives.
Yeah, they show up
You've
there.
got, yes, not only do they show up, but you have entire workshops, lectures, curriculums built around artificial intelligence, technology, the transhuman theme, all of that.
Do you see Burning Man marketed that way? Because, I mean,
No.
to the average person, it's like, oh, this is an orgy out in the desert.
Well, and that's how everybody couches
that's what,
it.
Right, that's what's going on.
Right.
But what's really going on
What's really going on is you have...
propelling these ideas and recruiting people, into that.
Here's the thing, though. It has almost always been, at least since the mid-1990s, a mecca for your technological elite. This is where Silicon Valley goes. This is really their event. It's really San Francisco's event. And so they've always had a techno aspect to this. So you can go and sit in workshops on techno-paganism, techno-shamanism. You can go to workshops on psychedelics, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies, bringing all this into play. What we're looking at here is and this is where Christopher Parridge brings it out, occulture. He just would define that as occulture.
Yeah.
It is this cultural connection with esoteric ideas, mystery, pagan concepts, all of it wrapped into one. And we have always had, and you're so right, we've always had this tendency to separate out and say, this is secular, here's the material, here's the scientific. No. Here it's blending, here it's coming together, here it's acting as one.
Yeah, and really, I mean, people can't help do that because Scripture teaches that these impulses are within us.
Right.
Why do we run around, looking to establish utopia?
Right.
It's because we know that something isn't the way it should be.
Right.
Okay, there's just something in us, and again, Scripture describes this, either a God absence or, in the case of our fragmentation, the fragmentation of the nations or society. Again, there you go back to the Babel event. So we got to fix that. I mean, even though a lot of people can't articulate it in biblical terms, that's what's going on, inside of them, and so they can be divorced, from anything that we would think, is sort of theologically traditional,
Right.
religiously traditional, but they still have these impulses, and then their solutions, is again where their knowledge base takes them,
Yes.
and where their skill set takes them, where their resources take them, and eventually they intentionally, do steer away, from the accountability, really, because if you have a separate deity like the Judeo-Christian world teaches that isn't just material, again, you have dualism instead of monism, that sort of thing. Well, then you have somebody you have to answer to.
Right.
Right. And we don't want that.
No, exactly.
It's all about us.
Right. And that monism aspect is so important because really that is what is being preached in our culture. That is the underlying, in my view, the underlying or the dominant worldview, this concept of oneness. And Peter Jones, a mutual friend, brings us out really well. And I really appreciate his perspective on that. Oneism versus twoism, not dualism, but twoism.
Right,
God being different, God being
trying to
other.
simplify it,
Right. And you really see that played out in Isaiah chapter 40. I mean, you see it playing out all through Scripture, but Isaiah chapter 40 for myself is really a keystone passage where God is, you can't compare him. He is an incomparable deity. He is beyond. He is truly the other. And that means then that he has a judgment and an ethic and a morality that is beyond what I can compare with. But the world is looking for its own sense of judgment, its own moral play, its own ethical framework. We're looking for our own story.
Yeah, we're used to thinking, in pop culture, it's the Oprah thing with Eckhart Tolle. We're all one. Let's get along. Let's hold hands. Okay, that's this little tiny part of oneism, the worldview.
Yes.
But you have all this other stuff going on that's sort of working in the background, like a computer program that is only detectable really to people who are, either looking for it, or they wind up in one of these sectors, where they just run into it, and then something happens, they read something, they watch something, and it draws them in a little bit deeper. But for the average person, this seems innocuous. It just seems normal,
Right.
like just culturally normal.
And for this culture, it is the new normal.
Yeah.
We accept it without even thinking about it. We're at the point where this trend behind the scenes, if you want to use that kind of language, is really at the forefront. It really comes through now across the board in terms of culture, in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of just the worldview that your neighbors, your friends, your family, your co-workers already adopt, whether they realize it or not. And I think that's significant for us as Christians to wrestle with.
Just as we have to wrap up our segment, we will certainly have you back. But is there a difference between this and, again, the sort of, I don't know, is it the older terminology, New Age? Are these two sides of the same coin, or is this like a trajectory it was one thing and now it's morphed into the other? I mean, how would you characterize that? And if there is a difference, or if there is some sort of progression or relationship, where are we at today on the spectrum there?
There is certainly an overlap. There's no question there is an overlap. New Age, of course, is again the older terminology.
Yeah.
But what the New Age did, especially in the 80s and 90s, was it really emphasized the me. It emphasized the individual, the self recognizing your own divinity, the self-pursuing.
The Shirley MacLaine thing.
Right, right. Whereas Re-enchantment emphasizes the we. It's an I-thou relationship.
Okay.
And so that's the difference. And that
Shirley
we as
MacLaine meets the Borg, or transitions to the Borg.
Right, exactly. Or meets Gaia.
Yeah.
It really is a more of a communal response. The New Age always had that more of a consumerist flavor, a consumerist, kind of like a spiritual smorgasbord to help the self aggrandize.
Right.
Whereas Re-enchantment is adopting everything within this ideal of a grander community. You're all part of a larger cosmic community.
So you bought it on a personal level, essentially in the New Age, and now we have to think about human destiny.
We have to think about collectively. We have to think about collectively.
Yeah.
Yes, because while the individual may have made you feel good as an individual, it may have done something for you as an individual. However we want to define that, it doesn't bring the world together. It doesn't create that heaven on earth. For that we need the we.
Yeah, and that's just as easy to market. If you really
Exactly.
think about
I know, and it still sells.
Like what
the
kind of
same.
an ogre are you if you don't want the masses to be happier or be whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
And it
you're
still goes
just
back.
a terrible person if you oppose this.
Right,
Yeah.
and it still goes back to the same biblical problem. And we're trying to find our own redemption.
Yeah.
We're creating our own story again.
Wow.
And it's an old story.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks for being with us today.
Mike, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to do this. And thanks everybody for watching Fringe Pop 321. Again, please visit our YouTube channel for other episodes, and of course our website. We have a companion website for all of the topical episodes we do. And if you're interested in supporting what we do at Fringe Pop, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/FringePop321. And again, remember, what you know may not be so.